This presentation deals with the relationship between complexity and entropy as represented in urban systems over historic time. Before I begin the presentation itself, I would like to recognize the following individuals for their help: Andrei Korotayev, Leonid Greenan, Anton Greenan, David Lepoire, Robin Ward, and Renee Stein. As a statement of position before the actual presentation, please consider the following. Those of us engaged in the math modeling of historical processes are often looked upon by traditional historians as equation-toting nomads attempting to breach the Great Wall of civilized history. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Just as multiple models of a given process always contribute greater understanding to the process being studied, multiple perspectives of the processes of history perform exactly the same function. The current slide presents a time frame for this study of the last 5,000 years of human history, extending from 3000 BCE to 2000 CE, and it's measured in terms of individual maximum urban area populations per century. There are two fundamental assumptions. First, that the size frequency distribution of urban areas per century can be represented by a power function with a negative exponent. And secondly, that the maximum urban area at any time represents an upper limit to the urban area size supportable by the world system of that time. The data used are maximum urban area sizes as found in the works of Modelsky and Chandler. Complexity and entropy are characterized by the formulas represented in this slide. I'll explain the derivation on request with regard to M, and with regard to entropy, it's simply the Shannon equation for entropy. This slide simply represents the overall pattern of growth for maximum urban areas over the last 5,000 years. It's clearly hyperbolic as defined by Korotayev. This slide represents the log transformed data of the previous slide, and you can see, I think, somewhat clearly, I hope, periods of both stasis and punctuation. This is the same slide with linear regressions for those periods of stasis and punctuation. A math model was constructed based on population size, carrying capacity, and technology to exhibit those periods of stasis and punctuation. Here, this graph represents how the stasis and punctuation periods are displayed graphically from the previous math model. This is the three-layer display of the math model run over 60 or 70 time steps, showing on top population, in the middle technology, and at the bottom carrying capacity. The significant thing here is that, first of all, the periods of stasis and punctuation match with regard to the top two graphs, and also that carrying capacity changes continuously. There was a problem noted that the variables are arbitrary. How are they related to one another? And this problem will be solved very elegantly by a suggestion from Claudio Macconi. Claudio Macconi's suggestion was simply to put all of the three equations of the model into the form of a continuous version of the Shannon entropy equation. The two-layered graph below represents on top the punctuated change of population over an arbitrary set of time periods, and the change in entropy over the same time periods with regard to the Shannon continuous entropy equation. If you'll notice, entropy builds during periods of stasis and then crashes at the end of those periods. Carrying capacity on top while appearing continuous has a discontinuous pattern of entropy change, and this is simply a show and tell of that change. This graph represents the punctuated changes in technology with regard to the associated entropy changes. And if you look closely, you'll see that the entropy changes occur a time step before the punctuation periods begin. The actual historic pattern of complexity based on data derived from maximum urban area size shows a continual increase with oscillations over time, with the maximum amount of complexity existing at the year 2000. The historic pattern of entropy is quite different, actually, in overall shape. It is hyperbolic. The last data point of the hyperbolic graph previously shown was removed to show the finer scale of changes in entropy over the last 4,900 years. And as you can see, those changes are either increasing or decreasing. There is no stasis. This graph simply represents a comparison of both historical processes in toto. Removing the last points from both displays gives the graph that you're looking at now. And if you look closely, you can see that in general, as complexity increases, entropy decreases, and vice versa. There are, however, some exceptions. This leads to two questions. What is the relationship between the extent of phases of stasis with the extent of phases of complexity and entropy? And how do the relationships represented by model calculations match those of empirical data? This slide summarizes in bare bones form the relationship between complexity change over entropy change. And as you'll see, there are 11 periods in which complexity decreases while entropy increases, and 11 periods in which complexity increases while entropy decreases. But there are 3 periods each in which both complexity and entropy decrease, or in which complexity and entropy increase. These periods will be dealt with in the next table. This table represents the changes, the parallel changes in either decrease of complexity and entropy or increase of the same variables. And very clearly, you can see that all changes occur over single century periods. The last period should be noted because it represents a period in which from 1900 to 2000, both entropy and complexity increase. Why should entropy decrease over periods of stasis? That is, of course, contra the results of the model. And to answer that question, I've turned to the thinking of one of the truly remarkable theoretical ecologists, and actually empirical ecologists as well, Ramon Margalef. In his book of some 40 or 50 years of age at least, he points out that species-species interactions are entropy-generating events. Instead of species-species interactions, you should think about urban area interactions. So for instance, in a Lotka Volterra world, anytime a predator consumes part or all of a prey, entropy is generated. In general, species-species interactions in less diverse ecosystems are stronger than in more diverse ecosystems. And so that would hold also for systems that are more or less diverse with regard to urban area distributions. In general, with regard to Margolef's thinking, more organized systems will be able to exploit less organized systems. And this is due to the fact that more organized systems have more energy gates. So if an urban area system has a greater value of M, then that means there are going to be more energy gates through which energy can flow. And as a consequence, with the increase in energy gates, there will be a reduction in the production of entropy. Diversity then is directly related to diversity and therefore complexity, directly related to energy use. The greater the complexity, the more efficient use of energy. During stasis, empirically, it was shown that complexity increases and entropy decreases. This is not very difficult to understand if, in fact, the complexity is increasing because there are more and more energy gates through which energy can flow, and that, of course, is the case. The reverse is true for periods of punctuation, with one huge exception, the most recent period. I'd like to go back briefly to the periods of stasis, and the graph, one of the early graphs, showed 3 periods of stasis, each with a higher level, so that during each of these periods, complexity increases and entropy decreases as empirically measured. But in each case, the level of complexity and complexity increase, and entropy decrease is greater than the preceding period of entropy decrease and complexity increase with regard to stasis. With regard to model and data, there is some agreement between model and data, but there are a number of contradictions. Very clearly, the model suggests continuous increase up to a point over a period of stasis, and then a significant decrease in entropy, whereas the actual empirical data suggests the reverse, that entropy decreases while complexity increases. So I think there is some concern about what the model is saying in terms of what is actually noted. However, we should keep in mind also that the model in question considers 3 variables: population size, without specific reference to urban area magnitude, carrying capacity, and technology. And none of that is directly expressed with regard to the empirical measures that are represented and have been presented here. So we'll have to consider where we go from here with regard to complexity and entropy, and what the empirical record shows, and what has to be done with the model. And I'll close this slide on that note. There is an unquestioned disconnect between much of what the model represents and what the empirical data show. So what's to be made of this contradiction? I'm going to quote John Maynard Smith from a wonderful little book that he wrote a long time ago. The publication date was 1968, Mathematical Ideas in Biology. And verbatim, Maynard Smith says this: "It is characteristic of mathematical ideas in biology that they are most suggestive when they are contradicted by experiment." Very clearly, there's a lot of work to be done. I would like to close with this note of concern at the beginning of the 21st century. It is quite clear that we live in interesting and precarious times. If both complexity and entropy are at historical highs, then this implies a significantly greater access to energy sources that permit the existence of the of such extremes and suggest a world system that requires high energy at all levels to continue to exist. There is, for the moment, no teeter-totter number of urban areas below the maximum. Um, uh, Both are being supported and reflect the enormous population blow-up phase, currently approximately 8 billion and growing, being currently experienced. How resilient this system is to partial or complete collapse cannot be specifically determined, but very clearly humanity is on new ground, ground that is moving beneath our feet, possibly too quickly to maintain an upright stance. The Red Queen, a la Lee Van Valen, 1973, may stumble, and if she does, then we can only thank ourselves for the context in which this stumbling occurs. Thank you very much.